This is KXSF 102.5 FM, streaming worldwide at www.kxsf.fm. And you're tuned in to Spark with Kelly Marlowe, informing minds, inspiring ideas, igniting innovation. Let the conversation sink into your soul.
This is Kelly Marlowe, host of Spark. Given that Spark is about having conversations that are impactful with others, it is perfect that I will be talking with Rachel Kjack about how to have a conversation with anyone. Rachel Kjack is an expert in social fluency and teaches it to many people and organizations. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So tell me, when I walk into a room full of strangers, where or how do I start?
Great question. So it's interesting because it really depends. If you walk into a room and you are naturally drawn to a certain part of the room or a certain group of people, you should absolutely head in that direction. But sometimes you walk into a room and you're just not really sure who you want to talk to. And so it's good to take a couple of minutes to look around and just see who looks interesting to you, see whose eye contact you catch. If there's speakers at an event, for example, you can, listen to one of the speakers that might seem interesting to you and then go up and speak to them afterwards. But it's really important to be genuine in who you're interested in.
Keep real radio alive, people. Live, local, real radio. That's why you're here listening to KXSF, right? On 102.5 FM San Francisco. We give you more of what you want, music and programming curated by actual human beings who live locally in your neighbourhoods, plus live music and interviews with local artists and bands. But to stay on the air, KXSF really needs your help. Donate now to KXSF by going online to www.kxsf.fm and clicking on donate. Thank you so much.
A commercial wanted to come in and interrupt our conversation to throw the conversation off in case you're in a room and someone just walks up and you don't know what the person's talking about.
Hey, that happens all the time, right? So perfect example. So, oh gosh, so the good comedic relief there. So anyway, when you walk into a room and you're looking around for who's interesting, you really want to be genuine about that, and it's important to really think about, who do you want to meet? What's your intention for that? And, really meeting new people and the ability to do that well makes a huge difference in the quality of your life.
So do I just go up to the person that looks the most interesting to me in the room? Or
yeah,
is open?
So let's say you found the person that you want to talk to. You've noticed somebody, you've caught their eye, or you've heard someone speak and you're interested in them. And the way that you want to actually do that is you want to come up to somebody and do what I call a quick read. So you might say something like, wow, you seem really interesting, or I like the talk that you just gave. Something that's sort of just a quick read, a value read of them, because a lot of times we build it up in our minds that we have to have this whole big reason for talking to somebody, but it's really, flattering to somebody when you just come up to them and say, you seemed interesting. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. So after you actually come up and make that quick read on them, you can, ask them a question. You can tell them what it was about them that was interesting, which seems much more genuine, if you can actually sort of back that up with what it was about them. And it can be something simple, like somebody could be wearing a cool hat or glasses. That could be the spark that you say, oh, you just seem kind of edgy and fashionable. I thought you seemed interesting. Wanted to come up and say hi. So that's how easy it is to get into a conversation. The key, of course, is being to commit to it, right? To be confident when you come up and to assume that it's going to go well. When you come up to somebody and you kind of only commit halfway, then it can really come across as either a lack of confidence on your part, or maybe you're just talking to them because, they were there. So it's important to commit. It's important to be okay with interrupting. A lot of times what I see happen, particularly at events, whether it's a party or a networking event or whatever, is that you walk up to somebody and someone else is already talking to them, and you stand there awkwardly, or someone stands there awkwardly waiting for their turn to interrupt. And rather, what you want to do is come up and just say, hey, wanted to say hi, and then, of course, let them finish their thought or what they were talking about, but it's their opportunity to invite you into that conversation, or at least you've said something, and the person can say, oh, hey, great to meet you. Give me just one sec, and finish their thought with the other person and then turn to you. Nothing's more awkward than just, for both parties, for you to just stand there waiting to talk to somebody. So, again, commit. Don't be halfway about it. Be okay with interrupting if that is the situation that you're faced with. Assume that it's going to go well. And then the other couple of things are, it's really important to slow down, not to speak too quickly. Sometimes when people are in more stressful situations, they will talk really fast. Or the other thing that happens is they don't talk loudly enough. Everybody's voice is louder in their own head. And so you may have experienced it before where somebody kind of looks at you like, what did you say? And so if you speak loudly, a little bit louder than you normally would, particularly in a room full of people, it actually really helps with that, conveyance of confidence, and also so the other person can hear you. It's just a function of that as well.
Good. So it's a nice intro to maybe compliment someone on what he or she's wearing, or you look familiar or something, but how do you then keep the conversation alive, keep it going and interesting?
Well, there's sort of two ways that I talk about what is kind of categorized as conversational agility, and that is wide rapport and deep rapport. So the first one I'll talk about is wide rapport. If anybody listening hates small talk, this is for you. This is the kind of situation where you're trying to figure out how to have something to talk about with somebody, or having lots of different topics that you can draw from at any given time. And so wide rapport is being able to talk to anyone, anywhere, at any time. So lots of different kinds of people. And some people feel like this is superficial, but the thing is, you really have to, it's kind of like you have to date before you get married. You can't just jump into the deep conversation without some sort of entry point where you're doing a little dance, getting to know each other a little bit, checking each other's body language out, which is something that we just do instinctively as humans. And so the way that you actually build wide rapport is through something that we call threading. And so it's an opportunity to insert a new topic of conversation or to thread off of something someone else is saying. So it's deceptively simple. If you're listening to someone else speak and they're talking about cheesecake, just something that's on my mind right now, and you just thought about baking a cheesecake, but you've gone dairy-free. You might say something like, oh, speaking of cheesecake, I'm trying to find a good dairy-free recipe to make something that's as close to a cheesecake as possible. Nothing's as good as the real thing, but do you have any ideas about that? Or thinking of something else that you want to say about that, maybe something that you read on the internet or whatever. And so what you're doing is you're showing interest in what they're talking about, but you're also contributing to the conversation. A lot of times what people will do is go into question mode. And there's nothing instinctively wrong with asking people questions. In fact, it's a great way to get to know somebody. But if all you're doing is asking questions and you're not inserting any of your own information or telling about yourself, a story or whatever, an opinion, then it's sort of imbalanced in the conversation. And you're putting the spotlight of attention too much on the other person. So you want to kind of keep in mind that balance. So this exercise that I'm about to share with you called Speaking Of is a great way to practice this and to sort of train your brain to be able to think of things to talk about. And you can do this on your own, but it works best with another person. So the way it works is that somebody says, let's say you and I will model this here, Kelly. So just make a statement about something. It can be anything.
wow, today is really hot. It's a great day to go surfing.
Oh, wow. So speaking of hot, I just boiled a cup of tea, and it is burning my mouth as we speak, or it had just burned my mouth. This is kind of a silly example, but the idea is not that you are having a real conversation. It's that you're practicing riffing off of what somebody says. So what you just said there, it's a really hot day. It looks like a good day to go surfing or something to that effect. I could have riffed off of day, hot, surfing, right? So I chose hot because I actually did just boil a cup of tea, and I really did just burn my tongue. So that was real for me, right? So the game or the exercise, you're sort of gamifying this, is to riff back and forth. And it's if the conversation makes sense, you're doing it wrong. The whole point is just to practice riffing off of each other's statements. So it might be, you hear me say, the tea was hot and I burnt my tongue, and then you might say, oh, speaking of tongue, and I don't know, I tried beef tongue once and it was gross, right? Something like that. So you just riff back and forth. The other way that you can practice is to go to Google and do random word generator, and it will literally just pop up random words. Like it could pop up spicy, and then you say, speaking of spicy, and then say something about that. The other thing about this is that there's sort of an order of importance or value, I guess would be a better word, for what makes a good thread. And the number one thing is a personal story. Because first of all, it's easiest to talk about yourself, and you just heard me giving an example of that. But also because you're sharing something about yourself. If you're contributing and sharing in the conversation, people are more likely to do that. It's inviting them in to actually share and be more open with you. And so that's number one. The second one is an opinion, something that you hold, something that you believe. And the third one is an interesting fact or something that you heard. So like you might say, oh, I was just listening to an NPR podcast today, and they were talking about, the upcoming election and who's polling, first, second, and third. And I found this interesting, blah, 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 right? So those are the order of importance. And so you don't want to just spout out facts and random, Jeopardy answers or questions. It's more about, like, what's something interesting that you heard or read or saw recently that you want to share.
But you don't want to go too personal, right?
What's that?
You don't want to go too personal when you first meet someone in terms of personal story, do you?
No, that's exactly the point, is that you're, first of all, it's you sharing a story, so you get to choose how personally you go. But, yeah, you're bringing up a good point. If you invest too much, and people have heard of the term TMI, too much information, then it can kind of seem off-putting. It's like you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. So a better way to do that is to think of light and positive stories that you can share. So something like cheesecake or hot tea, it's probably pretty low risk, right? Nobody's going to be offended. There's not going to be, this immediate sort of distance that you're putting between you and somebody else. Whereas if you go into deep political beliefs, that might, it might rub somebody the wrong way. It kind of depends on the audience. You have to read where you're at and who you're talking to and ease into some of the more risky topics. But absolutely, good point. You want to start with something light and kind of work towards the deeper level.
Okay, so the other question is opinions. Do we really want to give negative opinions, even though it may be honest, when you first meet someone?
I believe that it is good to do that. I think that if you know yourself to harbor some pretty strong opinions, say politically or something that's controversial, maybe you don't lead with that. But what I think is really important is that you be genuine above all else. So you don't want to hide either, right? It's a delicate balance. So having an opinion about something, but having an opinion at least initially about something that's light, topic-wise, is more safe. It's something that at least gets you into the conversation and gets the ball rolling as far as, the back and forth interchange.
Great idea. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
Sounds good.
Support for KXSF comes from Irish Voices, a small business that not only collects and shares conversations with the Irish diaspora in San Francisco and beyond through video and audio, but which also offers walking tours of San Francisco, telling the story of the large Irish influence in the city since the 1840s. Look for Irish Voices walking tours on Eventbrite, Facebook, or on the website at www.irishvoices.us. Thanks for supporting San Francisco Community Radio.
You are listening to Spark with Kelly Marlowe, returning to our conversation with Rachel Kjack about how to have a real conversation with anyone.
Thanks, Kelly. So I had mentioned a minute ago that there were sort of two areas that I think about conversational agility. One is building wide rapport, which we just talked about. And then the other one is my favorite, which is building deep rapport. And for some people, they actually are the opposite of what we talked about earlier, where they don't mind the small talk, but when it gets into, how to get more down into your heart center as opposed to just staying in your head, they're not really sure how to do that comfortably. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about what that means and what that looks like. And so I think about it as, a head-to-head conversation versus a heart-to-heart. So what I mean by that is, if you're talking head-to-head, you're really talking about, so where did you go on vacation, and how long were you there, and where did you stay, and, was the flight okay? It's all just kind of information, right? You're in your head about it. Whereas if you're talking to somebody about their vacation and you say, what was your favorite thing about it? When did you have what day was the best time, share that with me. Something that is a little bit deeper that gets people into what do they value, what do they care about, that creates an emotional anchor. And it makes people remember the conversation, and it makes people feel and say things to you like, you're so easy to talk to, or they just find themselves revealing a lot about themselves, whether it's like they're about their family or, about what they, enjoy doing and, what they care about, all of those things. And so this is really the special sauce, in my opinion. And the way that I typically teach this activity, or this style of conversation, I should say, is through an activity called Empathy Generator. And so Empathy Generator, and it might be a silly name, but it gets at the point of it, which is that you're trying to get to sort of an assumption about people's values so that they feel seen and heard. So I talked a little bit ago about spotlight of attention. When you are, in a situation where you're first in a conversation with somebody, you don't want to put all of the spotlight of attention on them by peppering them with question after question. But as you get into the conversation more, you really do want to inquire into somebody. You do want to put a little bit more spotlight on them. And so that's what this activity that I'm about to teach you is all about. So Empathy Generator basically goes like this. One person asks you would ask a what question, right? So you can do this as a exercise with somebody else just for practice, or you can do this in real life, which I highly recommend. It's nice to practice first just to kind of, try it out, and maybe we'll do one here in a minute, Kelly. Okay. But basically, you ask a what question, and one of these is best. What do you do for fun? What are you into? What are you passionate about? What do you do in your free time? One of those types of questions. And you just keep it open-ended. You don't qualify it. You just keep it open.
So
and then
I'm sorry to interrupt, Rachel, but what if you're a person who is introverted and has a hard time talking about yourself? And you can't get the person going on it.
Oh, right? Yeah, that's good. So, when you can't get somebody going at first, you're going to go and try to dig a little bit deeper by asking a question that's going to get them where they kind of have to talk. So I'll give you an example. So let's say you ask them, what do you do for fun? And they say something really succinct, like what's a one-word answer? Or what's something that's very succinct. Reading?
Yes.
Yeah. So then I would ask, well, what is it about reading that you like? Right? So what might you say to that? You can keep playing the introvert and give me some short answer.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, that's your answer?
Yeah.
Oh, you're a tough audience. Okay, so, well, if you did know what you liked about reading, what would it be?
Sci-fi.
Sci-fi?
Yeah.
Cool. I like sci-fi too. So what's like one of your favorite books, or to kind of describe an ideal sort of storyline of sci-fi that you're into?
Oh, one of my favorites is Brave New World.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
It's just about genetic engineering, what happens in the future when that happens, and that was written so far back, and it's happening now today.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's cool. Seems like topics that are happening today are really interesting to you through that lens. Like kind of thinking through the sci-fi lens, like everything in sci-fi, right? It's about what happened, or taking one little idea about what could possibly happen in the future, and then extrapolating that into a whole story. So isn't that cool? That cool and scary that was written a long time ago, and now it's actually happening.
So you basically have to know how to improv on top of one word. Is that the best way to describe it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I didn't explain as I was doing it, so I'll explain it now, is I'm attempting to make an assumption about your values. I'm attempting to kind of do a cold read on you. And so you weren't giving me very much information. I had to kind of make stuff up, read between the lines a little bit. And it might be that I value read you and I say, seems like current topics are of interest to you through that, lens of sci-fi from the past, or however I awkwardly worded it in our improv, but something to that effect. And you might say, well, kind of, but not really. It's more like this. It's that I just really like history, and I like to look at how we're repeating it now in the modern day and think about what we can do to break that cycle or something like that. Either way, it's fine, right? You don't have to. It's not about getting it right. It's about actually having an opportunity to read into somebody and see if they, will share a little bit more about themselves. And it's especially magic when you do that with somebody that, like you were, sort of just role modeling there, is a little bit shy. Or the other thing is sometimes people are just conditioned to be reserved at first. And so when you kind of commit to the conversation and you just keep moving forward as if, of course, we're going to have this great conversation, people kind of open up a little bit more. So let's actually role play that again, but just be yourself and answer truthfully. Not that those weren't real things about you, but give me a little bit more. So what are you into these days?
What am I into these days? I'm into staying healthy and doing research on what that means.
Oh, cool. So what is it about being healthy right now that's important to you?
Taking care of my shoulders, my back, just everything that's tightened over time.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've had some pain recently.
That's a really good insight on your part. Yes, I hurt my shoulder blade, and I've been trying to get it back to where it is, and it hasn't been easy.
Yeah. And so what kinds of things have been limiting for you?
I'm not as flexible in my right arm, so that's something that I'm trying to figure out how to loosen.
Yep. Well, it seems like not being in pain is really important to you, but it also seems like, just having flexibility and being able to enjoy life, right, and be active is also really important to you.
So I love, Rachel, how you are empathizing with my experience and you're drawing insight from it So can we go back to the empathy generator and how that
Yeah.
works and how to use it well?
Yep, absolutely. So I'm actually doing it right now with you. So the way that it works is you first ask an open-ended question. So what are you into? What are you passionate about? One of those. And then when the person gives you their answer, you say, what is it about that thing that you like? Or, you kind of went down an interesting path there because you were talking about your shoulder, and I was like, I bet she's in pain. I bet there's something going on there. So I followed my line, my curiosity. I followed that line of inquiry and tried to dig a little bit deeper, because you might have said, no, I'm not really in pain. I just, I've had problems with it in the past and I want to stay on top of things, right? So that would have informed the direction of our conversation. But in general, you want to say something like, what is it about being healthy that you like? Or what is it about reading that you like? And then some people will just blah, 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 blah. They'll tell you all you need to know. And you want to get to that assumption about their values, where you're doing that read on them. Seems like you're very creative. Seems like family is really important to you. Seems like staying healthy and fit is, one of the most important things to you. Something like that. But if you're dealing with a tough nut to crack, right, if it's somebody that's not giving you a lot of information when you say, what is it about that thing that you like, then you want to keep digging and ask something like, well, what would be an ideal day just if all you had on your plate was reading? You're like, what would be awesome for you? What would you love to do, right? Or paint me a picture of, how you like to take care of yourself these days. Something where they can't answer a very short answer. They have to share a story, or they have to share a little bit more about themselves. And the whole point of that is to get them to tell you enough about themselves where you can make an assumption, like reading between the lines is how I would think of it, about who they are, right? So like if you think that they sound competitive, or in a good way, then you might say that. If it seems like they're introspective, or highly intelligent in some way, or if they're super creative, like whatever you're picking up on, because guess what? There's a little bit of that in you to pick up on it in the other person. So that gives you an immediate connection point. What you don't want to do is you don't want to say, if somebody's talking about what they like to do and they're like, oh, I like to play this video game 14 hours a day. You don't want to say, seems like you're really boring. Seems like you don't get out much, right? So you want to keep it positive. But it's cool because sometimes you value read somebody and they don't even see it in themselves, right? We always hear about, like, people have a hard time taking compliments. If you value read somebody in a way where you're shining a light on something positive about them, there's this really cool effect. I got to think of a good name for it. Maybe you can help me. But there's this really cool effect where people start doing more of it just naturally, even if they didn't see that in themselves. So if you say you're a very creative person, they just start talking about creative stuff, or they just start, if you talk about family is really important to you, they'll just start talking about their family. So remember, you have a lot of power in the conversation, whatever direction you sort of steer it.
Interesting. Is there any way that one can practice using an empathy generator? Or, that's a tougher one, right? You have to be able to read the person and have insight of where the conversation is going.
Yeah. So I always talk about, like, start with a low-risk way of doing this. So you don't necessarily have to have this whole scripted conversation. You can look for opportunities to value read somebody based off to something they just share with you anyway. And I like to start with people that people who work in the service industry, like a barista or somebody that's, at the front counter at the cupcake place. Obviously, I have baked goods on the brain today. Or somebody at the grocery store, whatever it is, somebody that you're naturally interacting with. It could be a coworker, it could be somebody that you live with, but they're just naturally sharing something with you. And, you just make a value read on them. You just kind of slip it in naturally into the conversation. So I would say if you're gonna start light, practice that first, and do it with low risk people, right? If you're not feeling totally comfortable with how it's going to go, do it with people that already love and care about you, or do it with people that have to be nice to you that, work at the coffee shop.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a short break and come back with more with Rachel Kjack. Come dance in the streets of Western Edition with KXSF on Sunday, September 22nd, as the city celebrates another Sunday Streets event. As part of the Car-Free Day, Fillmore and sections of Fulton and Baker Streets will be open only to pedestrians, folks on wheels, and everyone of all ages between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. KXSF will be hosting a special live on-air broadcast in front of Flybar with music, merriment, and merchandise. So join us and be a part of KXSF's live Sunday Streets Western Edition broadcast on Sunday, September 22nd between 11 and 4. Look for us at the Flybar, 762 Divisadero at Fulton Street. See you there. We're back with Rachel Kjack on Social Fluency. This is KXSF. You're listening to Spark. So, Rachel, back to the empathy generator. So practice with baristas, people where it's, I guess, low emotional charge is the way to put it, or this less invested, right, in the situation.
It's more about that they're going to be nice to you, right? If it's you that wants to practice and not be stressed out about the risk factor, do it with people that are very likely to respond positively, right? And most people will respond positively, but sometimes if you're first starting out and this is really unnatural for you, it can seem a little awkward. And so just do it with people where, if it doesn't go perfectly, it's not going to matter that much, either because they already love and care about you, like your family, or because, it's a stranger, right? It's somebody that works at the grocery store or what have you. So that's why. That's the reason to start that way. But as you build in your confidence in this, then you want to actually practice that kind of whole sequence that I talked about, where you initiate and ask that what question, and then follow it up with what is it about that thing that you like or that, that you're into. And then, of course, remember, if you need to, if you have the tough nut to crack, then you can keep digging and try to get somebody to paint a picture for you. Whatever you need in order to be able to do that value read. Because values are where people's, it's their heart center. It's like what they care about. It's what their purpose is. And so if you can get to that place, you're going to build a quick connection with somebody that's deeper than just, the superficial or surface conversation.
Do you think you need to give yourself a time limit? Kind of, if you're not able to generate a conversation in 10 minutes, you should move on, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it's interesting. So there's a delicate sort of fine line between assuming that you're going to crack their initial reserved exterior if it's not going well, because of what I was saying before about people being kind of conditioned to resist at first. And on the other side of the line is, okay, just give it up, right? There's some people that they're just not in the mood to talk, or they're cranky, or you realize pretty quickly that, it's just not somebody that's a good fit for you. And so there's nothing wrong with gracefully exiting the conversation, or not gracefully. Sometimes it's impossible to be graceful if it's going really awkwardly. So, I would say if you've been talking to somebody, even 5 minutes is a really long time when you first meet somebody to not be getting anything in return. You'll instinctively feel that it's time to go. But the other thing too is on the front side of this is that you want to have, every conversation, every interaction between people, especially initially, should have a little bit of tension. If everything was super easy and didn't have any sort of drama to it, and I don't mean drama in a bad way, then it wouldn't be interesting, right? It wouldn't be engaging. So you do want to stick with it at first, like I was talking about, committing to, I'm going to have this great conversation with this person in your head. But at the same time, after, I would say 5 minutes, if it's not going well, then you want to exit. And you can do that in a bunch of different ways. It depends on the circumstance where you're at and what's going on. What I would say is it's always easier to exit a conversation if you're standing versus sitting. So if you're at a networking event or if you meet somebody, out in a public place, don't sit right away. Sometimes people at a networking event will sit down with each other, and then they kind of close themselves off unintentionally from a body language perspective. Whereas if you're standing, you can kind of keep, your body language open instead of squaring off and facing the person directly, so that it's a little bit easier and more relaxed. If you're like, okay, well, it was nice to meet you, shake their hand, and be on your way.
So what are the top 5 exit strategies you would recommend?
Oh, gosh, top 5. Okay. Well, I think that, the easiest one is not really explaining why you're exiting, just saying, hey, it was nice to meet you. If you want to exchange contact information, you can do that on the way out. If you don't, then just say it was nice to meet you, give them a quick handshake, and be on your way, right? Or if it's not appropriate to do a handshake, you don't even have to do that. Sometimes I think people think they have to have, again, just like getting into the conversation, they have to have a reason to get out of it. And so, that's the simplest one. Another couple of ideas, if you feel like you need a reason, one of them is you need to go refresh your drink, or another one could be that you're going to excuse yourself because you're leaving the event, and don't do that unless it's true, because if they see you at the event later and you haven't left, then that's not very nice. So, depending on the circumstance, you can make a reasonable excuse for why you're exiting. The other thing you can do is if you're I keep using the networking event, but that's sort of the most general example I can give. It could be, whether it's a social thing like a party or whether it's a work thing, doesn't matter. But when you're exiting, if you want to make that person feel good, which is a great way to be, end on a high note. Say, you can do that value read. You could say, oh, it seems like you're a really interesting person. Great to meet you. Shake their hand. Hopefully I'll see you around, right? Or I'll send you a LinkedIn invite later, right? Or, hey, are you on Facebook? Depending on the context, could be, Instagram, whatever. So having something where it's not just this awkward cutoff, but there's some high note that you're ending on, something nice that you say about them, or it was really enjoyable having this conversation with you. And you can even do a callback, which is a reference to something that you both talked about. So, if they talked about going on vacation with their family, say, hey, have a great time on vacation, and, talk to you later. And so going back to the top 5, I'm testing myself here. So just the general exit of the conversation without explanation, but, ending on a high note. There's the reason that you need to leave. And I guess, 2, 3, 4, and 5, Kelly, are all reasons that you need to leave. So it could be it could be one of the ones I mentioned, or it could be, I think this one is really genuine if you do it well. And it is that if you're at an event and you're there to meet lots of people, a lot of times people will get stuck in a conversation and they don't know how to get out. So they end up spending the majority of the night with one person or 2 people. And so you could say, hey, I set a goal for myself of meeting 5 people tonight. I'm super happy to meet you. I hope we can get together for coffee where we can spend more time together. But I'm going to, make my exit or something to that effect. people actually appreciate that you're honest about it, and that you could say that you set a goal of 5 people, or you could be less specific about it, and you could just say, hey, so, it was awesome to meet you, and let's go meet some other folks, or something like that. And sometimes I actually take that person with me. There's actually a whole exercise that I call social cyclone, where you actually kind of pick people up along the way, like a cyclone picks up all of the stuff that, whips into the air, and you take those people with you, and then you go meet the next person, right? And so pretty soon there's like a cyclone of your social circle at the event, and people are like, what's going on over there? That looks interesting. So if you feel comfortable with that, you can also take them with you.
That's great advice. So, Rachel, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back with more ways to fluently navigate the room.
Support for San Francisco Community Radio is provided by Rainbow Grocery, a worker-owned cooperative that has been serving San Francisco vegetarian food and providing a model for sustainable living since 1975. Rainbow is located at 1745 Folsom Street. Visit them online at www.rainbow.coop. San Francisco Community Radio would like to thank Rainbow Grocery for their continued support.
You are listening to Spark with Kelly Marlowe. I'm talking with Rachel Kjack about how to have a conversation with anyone, anywhere. Right before the break, we talked about how to actually stop or interrupt or gently break away from a conversation that we may not want to be in anymore. So, Rachel, what if the conversation just keeps on going and you cannot stop the person from talking?
Yeah, I resemble that remark. Sometimes I can be the one that's talking too much. Well, first of all, let me just say, if you're a talker, it's really important to be mindful of airtime and space for others to enter the conversation. I've noticed that when people do that, it's almost like a nervous energy sometimes, where they are not sure how to just let there be silence, right? And for other people, that can be really off-putting and hard, because they don't know when to enter the conversation, and it forces them to have to interrupt you. So that aside, I think that if somebody else is the one that's talking nonstop, that very first activity that we talked about, the speaking of one, can come in very handy. So if you're at an event of some sort, or you're in a group of people and they're talking, and someone's been talking about their cat who's been sick for 30 minutes, everybody's eyes are rolling, and you can just tell by their body language, including your own, that you're sort of over it, you can interrupt the conversation and thread off of something that they said and change the topic, and you are the hero of that conversation. And you might even be the hero with the person that you interrupted, because they're tired of hearing themselves talk. They just don't know how to stop. So I think it can be really a useful activity for a whole bunch of reasons. So you might, they're talking about their cat, and they're saying, we had to go to the vet every week for the past month. Well, speaking of the vet, I used to have this amazing vet that was so good with my animals, and he finally retired, and it's just so great when people are so caring to, our animal friends, and then drop the topic, right? Like move on to something else. Or you can go vastly in a different direction and not talk about vets or pets or any of that. You could say, speaking of cats, I went and saw Cats on Broadway, and I thought it was going to be dumb, but it was amazing. Have you seen any good theater? Is anybody here into theater? Like wildly different.
Insert yourself somehow. Say something nice really about the conversation, and then turn it in a different direction if you can.
Yeah. The other thing is, if the person's just talking and not leaving space, what you can, and you do want to keep talking about that subject, then, rather than interrupting and changing the topic, you might just say, you might just jump in and say, that's really interesting, or some sort of verbal cue that you want to say something, right? And you have to do it confidently, and it can be a little intimidating. The other way to do it is through body language. So if you're standing next to somebody, you don't want to grab somebody with an open palmed hand. That's a little too much. But if you touch somebody with the back of your hand, say on the upper arm, you can just go, hey, that's a great idea, right? So as I'm saying that, I'm tapping the back of their, the side of their arm with the back of my hand. Hey, that's a great idea. It's like a way to break the conversation just so that they can, it's like almost physically letting you into the conversation. So there's different body language things, but that's the least intimate, right? So for somebody you don't know very well, I would recommend back of the hand on the upper arm.
Well, that brings us to physical language and personal space, right? I mean, you have to make sure you're not crossing your arms and you're jumpy. So can you tell us about how to convey in positive physical language and be mindful of personal space and how to handle that?
Yeah, well, body language is what you're talking about, and I think that, there's a lot of different contexts culturally. So some people feel more comfortable based on their family and culture of origin with getting more up in people's physical space, and others less so. In a Western society, we're a little bit more into the distance, but, we're also a melting pot, right? So there's people from everywhere. And so really, if you're thinking about personal space, and you're probably thinking about it because either yours is being invaded or you feel like maybe you invaded somebody else's, you have to be really aware of people's reactions. And the first reaction they always have is their body language. So paying attention to how people's eye contact is, and I'll explain that a little bit more, but also their physical body. So if somebody recoils or, is jumpy or kind of pulls back, I call it doing the dance. A lot of times what I'll see is women are more comfortable being in personal space with others than men. Men tend to be a little, and this is in general, they tend to be a little bit more further apart. So I'll see a man and a woman talking to each other, say they don't know each other very well, and the woman will be leaning in and the man will be leaning out, and he'll shift back on his feet and the woman will shift forward, and that's what I call the dance. Pretty soon it looks like they're dancing because they're shifting around. So you have to be super aware of what people's response is. For most people, if you tap them lightly on the back of the arm or on the arm with the back of your hand, that's not too much, as long as your whole body isn't physically, 3 inches from them, right? You want to have to extend your arm out in order to do that, and that tells you that you're leaving a little bit of personal space. But it's also a great opportunity to think about how you're standing, because the way that you stand, to the example I just gave about the man and the woman dancing, is, if two men, if you see them at a distance and they're squared off facing each other, it either looks like they want to, get like in a fight with each other, or that they're about to be intimate, right? It looks like intense, is the only way I can put it. Whereas if from a distance, and by a distance I mean across the room, you see two women facing off to each other, it's like, oh, they're just interested in talking to each other. And so there's, obviously those are very binary and general about gender, but that's just to kind of give a loose spectrum to think about. And so there's all variations of that. But what you can do is you can open up your stance. So you're not squared off directly with somebody, facing them, putting them entirely in your spotlight of attention, but you're not completely, side by side, not leaning in towards them at all. And what that does is it gives you the opportunity to lean in at moments when the conversation warrants it, and then lean back out. And it creates this openness that also what's cool, sort of the unintended side effect, is other people can join the conversation, right? Because it looks like you're open. You're not closed off, just the two of you.
Okay. Rachel, we're going to take a short break and be right back. Hi, everyone. Join us this Friday, tomorrow, at the Willows for our KXSF DJ night from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. We hope to see you there. You are listening to KXSF, tuning into Spark with our guest, Rachel Kjack, and she is talking about physical space, how we navigate that when we're engaging with others. So let me make sure I understand this. Don't square off. Be a little bit turned to the side when you're talking to somebody. And then that gives you some space to navigate away. I'm kidding. If you need to.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess it's like 45 degrees we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's about 45 degrees. That's a good, putting some specificity to it. It's great. Yeah. And then you can, go in. But if you start to lean in and the other person leans out, then lean back out yourself. There's a concept called mirroring. It's been around forever. Salespeople use it, and it's where you mirror the other person's body language, and it tends to have the impact that this person is like me, right? But that being said, you don't want to, if the other person is being really closed off, to use your example from a second ago, like they have their arms crossed in front of them, you don't want to mirror any closed off body language, because then that means you're both closed off, right? Or if you do cross your arms, then and you notice yourself doing it, because a lot of us just do it instinctively, then you uncross them right away. And what's crazy is if you start experimenting with this, you'll start to notice that people will mirror your body language. So if you put your hands on your hips, after a while, the person you're talking to will do the same thing. Or if you're leaning on the table, the other person will do the same thing. And you can even see it from a distance. Like if two people are sitting at a table and one person crosses their legs, you'll start to notice at some point other people crossing their legs. So your goal is to stay open, uncross legs and arms preferably, and it brings sort of, from a, what is the word I'm looking for, somatic mind-body connection perspective. When your body is open, then you are open to the conversation, and vice versa.
So we have 6 minutes left. 2 questions. Oh, actually, it's 1 question and 1 call to action. So the last question is, it's going badly. What are some recovery techniques if it becomes embarrassing or awkward and you just cringing inside?
Well, I would say humor is your best friend, right? If you can be a little bit self-deprecating without showing a lack of confidence, right? If you say, well, I guess I didn't do that very well, or, I guess I didn't, I guess I'm not firing on all cylinders today, or something just kind of light-humored, then it tends to lighten the mood. So that's, what I would typically do. If you're not comfortable with humor, or you're not good at it, or you feel like, it's not appropriate for the situation, I mean, really a fast exit is probably your best bet, because at some point it's hard to recover. So I always say the first 10 minutes are most important in sort of shaping the dynamic of the relationship. So if you just met somebody and it's not going well after 10 minutes, which can lighten the mood and hopefully bring the conversation. Yeah. Great to meet you. Hope you have a nice night. Like I said, always end on a high note. You know what's interesting, Kelly? Sometimes you perceive that it's going worse than it actually is, and the other person doesn't necessarily see that. They might be distracted. They might be just unaware of how they're coming across. So just assume, it's probably not as bad as you thought it was, and leave it on a high note. Yep.
Okay, so for our listeners, what would the call of action be that would enable them to become more socially fluent in having a real conversation easily with anyone, at a party, at a networking event, or just anywhere?
Yeah. So I highly recommend you think about, from everything you've heard me talk about, what you want to start doing. Maybe that's a new thing that I talked about. What do you want to stop doing? What do you want to do differently? And what do you start doing, stop doing, do differently, or do more of, right? So if you think about that and you're like, you know what, I really want to start practicing value reading people, then I would recommend you actually, like we talked about, go out and practice that conversational agility, that empathy generator exercise. If you want to build more rapport with lots of different people and get good at just the approach and the meeting people, then you want to practice threading. You want to practice approaching lots of different people and trying that quick read suggestion that I had of you seemed interesting, or like the talk that you just gave, or you're wearing a cool hat. You seem be careful. Talk that you just gave, or you're wearing a cool hat. You seem be careful. I just don't remember how it went. Journaling is your best friend, even if it's like 5 minutes, just writing down how it went. So if you're going to meet 5 people in the next week and that's what you want to work on, then every day, hopefully each day you meet one person, and then it's a bonus on Saturday and Sunday, right? If you start on Monday, then you can meet 7 people, right? Then you've overshot your goal, which is awesome. But don't go more than 5 times in a week with any of this stuff, and definitely journaling. And all you want to document is what happened, how did you feel, and what was your experience of how it went.
Well, it sounds like a great plan, Rachel. And this is the end of the program at this time. Thank you for joining Spark, and stay tuned for Guillermo Goy for his program coming up with Rock Neto.
Thanks, Kelly.